The plasma bolt meant for Ambassador Corvic Dralis struck Amelia Vasquez directly in the chest. She had thrown herself between the hegemony assassin and the Kitharian delegate without hesitation, her diplomatic immunity meaning nothing in the face of a friend's life. The superheated energy tore through her ceremonial jacket and burned through flesh and bone, sending her crashing into the ornate conference table. Where the Outer Rim peace accords had been so close to ratification, Amelia, Dralis's forearms, caught her as she fell, his chitinous faceplates flaring with bioluminescent distress around them. The elegant chamber of the Nexus station erupted into chaos as security forces stormed in, weapons drawn. But it was too late. The human diplomat, who had spent 3 years building trust between 17 different species, was dying in pools of her own blood. The Accords, she whispered, crimson foam speckling her lips, her brown eyes, still sharp with intelligence. Despite the trauma, fixed on Dralis. Don't let this be for nothing. Ambassador Dralis felt something cold settle in his primary heart as he watched the light fade from those uniquely expressive human eyes. In 3 decades of diplomacy, he had never encountered a species quite like humanity, simultaneously capable of breathtaking compassion and terrifying ruthlessness. Amelia Vasquez had embodied the former. He feared what would emerge to represent the latter. The assassination was not random. Intelligence reports had been flowing for weeks about hegemony operations designed to destabilize the Outer Rim. The peace accords would have created an economic and military alliance that threatened their expansion plans. A dead human diplomat would ensure those accords died with her. What the hegemony hadn't calculated was the response from Earth. Fleet Admiral Castor Brennan received the encrypted message while reviewing tactical reports. In his ready room, aboard the dreadnought Unbreakable, the words on his screen seemed to blur as he read them twice, then a third time. Amelia had been his daughter's godmother. She had bounced little Miranda on her knee and told her stories about alien worlds where different species lived in harmony. Sir, Commander Reese Torres noticed the change in her superior's expression. Orders from command. Brennan's jaw tightened as he set down the tablet. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of finality that Torres had learned to recognize and fear. Signal the fleet. All ships are to converge on Nexus Station immediately, and send a priority message to Admiral Nakamura's task force. Tell her to abandon the patrol mission and rendezvous with us at these coordinates, sir. That would leave the entire Proxima sector undefended. Torres. Brennan's pale blue eyes seemed to burn with an inner fire. They killed a diplomat under a flag of truce. They killed a woman who dedicated her life to peace. He stood, his massive frame casting a shadow across the tactical display. There won't be anything left of their forces to threaten Proxima when we're done. The commander felt a chill run down her spine. She had served under Brennan for 6 years. Through border skirmishes and pirate suppression campaigns, she had never seen him like this cold, controlled, but with something savage lurking beneath the surface. As the Unbreakable changed course toward Nexus Station, its quantum drives pushing the massive vessel to maximum velocity, similar scenes played out across human space. The death of Ambassador Vasquez had triggered something primal in the species that had clawed its way up from predators to reach the star's dot in the hegemony command centers. Military analysts congratulated themselves on a successful operation. They had prevented the Outer Rim alliance and removed a troublesome human advocate in one strike. The political ramifications would take months to sort out, by which time their expansion would be complete. They had no idea they had just declared war on the wrong species. The Hegemony Patrol Squadron detected the human fleet 6 hours before the first shots were fired. Captain Vorthik of the destroyer Bonecrusher reviewed the sensor readings with growing unease. 6 to 7 human vessels had materialized at the edge of the Nexus system, their quantum signatures burning like tiny stars against the cosmic background. The formation was unlike anything in Hegemony tactical databases, loose, seemingly chaotic, but with an underlying pattern that suggested coordinated aggression. Send a challenge, Vorthik ordered, his scaled hands drumming against his command throne. Demand they state their intentions. The response came not in words, but in weapons fire. Unbreakable's main batteries spoke first. Twin lances of coherent energy that crossed the void in microseconds. The Hegemony destroyer Fist of Dominion simply ceased to exist, its shields collapsing and hull vaporizing under the concentrated firepower. The explosion painted space in brilliant oranges and whites. All ships, weapons free. Admiral Brennan's Voice echoed across the fleet's communication channels. Show them what happens when they murder diplomats. The battle that followed was less a fight than a slaughter. Human military doctrine had evolved through centuries of warfare against their own species. They understood the value of overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. The hegemony had grown soft through decades of bullying weaker civilizations. Their tactics assumed enemy compliance with accepted rules of engagement. Humans had just demonstrated they were done playing by those rules. The cruiser Retribution accelerated directly into the enemy formation, its armored prow designed to ram as much as to intimidate. Hegemony vessels scattered like startled fish, their captains unprepared for such brutal directness. Captain Maria Santos opened fire with everything she had, as her ship carved through their ranks both cannons, particle beams, missile salvos, and kinetic penetrators, turning the void into a deadly light show. Target their command vessel, she ordered as her tactical officer highlighted the Hegemony flagship. The dreadnought Eternal Supremacy was twice the size of any human ship, its hull bristling with weapons and defensive systems. Under normal circumstances, it would have been suicide to engage. These were not normal circumstances. Retribution took a full spread of plasma torpedoes to her port shields, the barriers flickering and dying under the assault. Hull plates buckled, and atmosphere vented, but Santos never wavered from her intercept course. Her crew worked with the desperate efficiency of those who knew their cause was righteous. "Ma'am, we're taking massive damage," her first officer reported as another salvo slammed into their hull. "Recommend we fall back in." "Negative." Santos's voice cut through the bridge chatter like a blade. "We're not running from these bastards. Not today." The two capital ships closed to point-blank range, their weapons tearing at each other's armor in a deadly embrace. Eternal Supremacy's superior firepower began to tell. But Santos had one advantage the Hegemony captain lacked: absolute commitment to victory regardless of cost. "All hands, brace for impact," she announced shipwide, ramming speed. The collision sent shockwaves through both vessels. Retribution's reinforced prow punched through the Hegemony dreadnought's hull like a spear, her momentum carrying her deep into the enemy ship's superstructure. Emergency bulkheads sealed and atmosphere rushed out, but the damage was catastrophic. Captain Santos died at her post when the bridge took a direct hit, but her sacrifice had crippled the enemy flagship. The Eternal Supremacy listed helplessly as secondary explosions rippled through her hull, her command structure in chaos. Admiral Brennan watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. 17 Hegemony vessels destroyed, 4 more crippled. Human losses were light of 3 ships lost, 7 damaged, but each casualty felt personal. These were his people, dying because alien bastards thought they could murder diplomats with impunity. "Signal the surviving Hegemony ships," he ordered. "Tell them to stand down and prepare to be boarded. Any vessel that attempts to flee will be destroyed." The response came in the form of a general retreat, the remaining enemy ships scattering toward the system's edge. Brennan's expression didn't change. "Pursue course. Hunt them down." As the human fleet gave chase, their quantum drives pushing them to dangerous velocities, a new pattern began to emerge. This wasn't just retaliation for a single assassination. This was the beginning of something the galaxy had never seen: humanity fully unleashed in righteous fury. The Hegemony had killed 1 diplomat. They were about to learn the true cost of that decision. High Admiral Zexifol of the Hegemony 4th Fleet received the emergency transmission while reviewing expansion plans in his private chambers aboard the super dreadnought World Ender. The holographic display showed the tactical aftermath at Nexus Station debris fields where proud warships had been. Casualty reports that made his secondary hearts flutter with unease. 17 vessels gone, along with 8,000 of the Hegemony's finest warriors. "The humans did this?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that made his aide step back instinctively. "Yes, High Admiral. Intelligence suggests this was retaliation for the successful termination of their diplomatic representative." Zexifil's compound eyes narrowed. The assassination had been precisely calculated to prevent the Outer Rim alliance. A single human's death in exchange for continued Hegemony expansion seemed like an acceptable trade, but the response had been unexpected. "Assemble the full 4th Fleet. We will show these mammals the consequences of challenging the Hegemony." 3 days later, 230 Hegemony warships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system, home to one of humanity's most important colonies. The formation was a testament to military might: dreadnoughts, battle cruisers, destroyers, and support vessels arranged in perfect geometric precision. Each ship bore the scarred hulls and weapon scars of a dozen conquered worlds. The human response was immediate and unexpected. Unknown vessels. This is Admiral Rebecca Shaw of the Terran Colonial Defense Force. You are in violation of human colonial space. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. The transmission came from a single ship, the light cruiser Dancing Bear, barely a third the size of Zexathel's smallest destroyer. The High Admiral's mandibles clicked in amusement. Human audacity never ceased to entertain him. I am High Admiral Zexathel of the 4th Fleet. You will surrender unconditionally, or we will reduce your pathetic colony to radioactive ash. You have 30 standard minutes to comply. Shaw's response came back within seconds, and the tone made Zexathel's amusement curdle into something like unease. Admiral, you seem to be under the impression that you're dealing with someone. Who gives a damn about your threats? Let me clarify our position. You murdered Ambassador Vasquez under a flag of truce. You violated every principle of civilized conduct. And now you've brought an invasion fleet to threaten human civilians. Her voice carried the same cold fury that had marked Admiral Brennan's declaration. We don't negotiate with murderers. The Dancing Bear opened fire first. Her lone particle cannon lashing out at the nearest hegemony destroyer. The beam splashed harmlessly against military-grade shields, but the symbolism was unmistakable. One human ship against an entire fleet, and she was choosing to fight. Destroy that impudent vessel, Zexathel ordered. What happened next would be analyzed in military academies for decades to come. The Kepler system's asteroid belt suddenly came alive, with hidden weapons platforms, their stealth fields dropping to reveal dozens of automated defense installations. Orbital defense stations that had appeared to be mining platforms unveiled massive railgun arrays. The civilian freighters scattered throughout the system revealed their true nature as disguised warships, their cargo bays opening to launch swarms of attack drones. Most disturbing of all, the system's primary space station, supposedly a research facility studying exotic matter, began to unfold like a deadly flower. Its outer hull split apart to reveal the largest weapons array the hegemony had ever encountered. Energy signatures that made their sensors scream warnings about imminent destruction. Admiral Shaw's voice echoed across all frequencies, calm and utterly remorseless. High Admiral, welcome to the Kepler defense grid. You wanted to see what happens when you threaten human civilians. Consider this a practical demonstration. The first salvo from the hidden defenses hit the hegemony formation. Like the wrath of an angry god, kinetic penetrators accelerated to significant fractions of light speed, punched through shields and armor as if they were paper. Energy beams coordinated by quantum-entangled targeting systems focused on weak points with surgical precision. Missile swarms guided by AI algorithms that had learned from analyzing hegemony tactics in 1,000 previous engagements found their targets with devastating efficiency. 18 hegemony vessels died in the first minute. Impossible, Zexathel breathed, watching his tactical display fill with casualty reports. The intelligence report said this was a research colony, minimal defenses. His aide's voice was barely a whisper. Sir, I'm receiving updated intelligence from our deep cover assets, the humans. They've been militarizing everything, every colony, every station, every asteroid mining operation. They've turned their entire civilization into a fortress. The High Admiral felt something like terror creep into his primary heart. The humans weren't just retaliating for their ambassador's death. They had been preparing for this war for years, decades perhaps. The assassination had simply provided them with the justification they needed to unleash capabilities that defied every assumption about their military potential. As another wave of kinetic rounds tore through his formation, Zexathel finally understood the magnitude of his species' miscalculation. They hadn't killed a diplomat. They had awakened a sleeping giant that had spent generations preparing for exactly this moment. And now it was far too late to put it back to sleep. The emergency session of the Hegemony War Council convened as reports of the Kepler massacre flooded. High Admiral Zexathel stood before the assembly of the hegemony's most senior commanders, his usually immaculate uniform torn and stained with the blood of his own species. Of the 230 ships that had entered the Kepler system, only 67 had escaped. The 4th Fleet, the pride of the hegemony military, had been shattered in less than 6 hours. How? Supreme Commander Yolthic's voice echoed through the vast chamber, his bioluminescent patches flickering with barely contained rage. How did these mammals anticipate our every move? The intelligence briefing that followed painted a picture that chilled every officer present. Humanity hadn't simply been building ships and weapons during their century of expansion. They had been studying their neighbors, cataloging weaknesses, analyzing tactical patterns, and preparing for inevitable conflict with the methodical patience of apex predators. Their defensive doctrine is based on something they call defense in depth, the intelligence officer reported, his voice shaking. Every human system is a potential fortress. Every civilian installation has military applications. They've spent decades turning their entire civilization into a weapon. But the humans weren't content to remain on the defensive. Admiral Brennan's fleet had been reinforced by elements from across human space. 43 vessels had become 91, then 136 as ships arrived from distant colonies. The Unbreakable now led a force that represented the largest concentration of human military power ever assembled. Intelligence reports indicate major hegemony installations in the Valdres system. Commander Torres briefed as the fleet approached their next target, 3 orbital shipyards, a major supply depot, and approximately 40,000 military personnel. Brennan studied the tactical display with the intensity of a surgeon examining a patient. The Valdres system was heavily fortified, protected by overlapping fields of fire from orbital platforms and a significant fleet presence. Under normal circumstances, it would require a prolonged siege to reduce such defenses, but Brennan wasn't planning a siege. Signal Captain Reeves aboard Hammer of Justice, he ordered. Tell him to begin Phase 1. 27 human ships broke off from the main formation, accelerating toward the system's outer edge. To hegemony observers, it appeared to be a flanking maneuver, predictable. Conventional tactics that could be countered with standard defensive deployments. The deception held until Hammer of Justice and her escorts reached the system's primary asteroid field. What the hegemony hadn't realized was that human engineering teams had been seeding asteroid belts throughout contested space for months, not with weapons platforms or hidden bases, but with something far more sinister: fusion charges embedded deep within planetary debris, waiting for the right moment to be activated. Captain Reeves' ships didn't engage the hegemony defenses directly. Instead, they began broadcasting carefully modulated signals to the modified asteroids. Ancient rock that had drifted in space for millions of years suddenly became weapons of unimaginable destruction. The first artificial meteor storm hit Valdres, Prime's orbital infrastructure 17 minutes later. Chunks of stone and metal accelerated to relativistic velocities by controlled fusion detonations, struck the hegemony installations with the force of nuclear weapons. Orbital shipyards that had taken decades to construct vanished in seconds, their molecular structure unable to withstand the kinetic forces involved. Defense platforms designed to withstand direct hits from capital ship weapons disintegrated like tissue paper. By the void, Admiral Corthell breathed as he watched his command dissolve around him. The bridge of his flagship Devourer shook as debris impacts overwhelmed the ship's shields. How are they doing this? His question was answered by the main human fleet's arrival. Brennan's ships emerged from quantum space at impossible proximity to the planet, their drives somehow calibrated to drop them directly into weapons range. The tactical advantage was overwhelming. The hegemony fleet was scattered, their supporting infrastructure destroyed, and their command structure in chaos. What followed wasn't a battle. It was an execution. The dreadnought Unbreakable engaged 3 hegemony capital ships simultaneously, her weapon systems firing in perfectly coordinated sequences that overwhelmed enemy defenses. Through sheer volume of fire, Captain Yamamoto's destroyer squadron performed a tactical maneuver that defied every principle of space combat, using gravitational slingshot effects around the planet's moons to achieve acceleration, profiles that let them attack from impossible angles. Most devastating of all was the psychological impact. Hegemony commanders who had built their careers on the assumption of technological and tactical superiority found themselves outmatched by opponents who fought with a combination of scientific precision and berserker fury that defied every military model. The Devourer lasted 18 minutes under concentrated fire from the human fleet. Admiral Corthell died at his post when a kinetic penetrator punched through his ship's main reactor, the subsequent explosion visible from the planet's surface. His final transmission was a single word repeated over and over: impossible. When the tactical computers finished calculating casualty figures, the results were stark. 46 hegemony vessels destroyed, 12 captured, with only 7 managing to escape the system. Human losses: 3 ships damaged, with total casualties under 200. But the strategic implications were even more devastating. The Valdris system had been a major hub for hegemony expansion into the Outer Rim. Its destruction would cripple their ability to project power across 3 sectors, creating a gap in their lines that would take years to rebuild. As Admiral Brennan reviewed the battle reports, his expression remained grimly satisfied. They were just getting started. Ambassador Vasquez's death had unleashed something that had been building in humanity for generations, the accumulated fury of a species that had clawed its way to the stars and would not be denied their place. Among them, the hegemony had made the mistake of believing that killing one diplomat would be a minor inconvenience. They were about to learn that they had triggered a war they could not win. The Battle of Nexus Major would be remembered as the largest space engagement in galactic history, and the beginning of the hegemony's final collapse. Supreme Commander Yolthik had assembled the might of 7 fleets in the Nexus Major system, a show of force designed to crush human expansion once and for all. 843 vessels formed a defensive wall around the system's industrial center, their combined firepower capable of reducing entire worlds to molten slag. The cream of hegemony military leadership was present, determined to prove that their recent defeats had been mere setbacks. Let them come, Yolthik declared from the bridge of the super dreadnought Galaxy's End. We will show these mammals that the hegemony has ruled space for 1,000 years, and will rule it for 1,000 more. The human fleet that emerged from quantum space was smaller only for 112 vessels, but there was something different about them. These ships bore the scars of previous battles, their hulls marked with kill tallies and unit insignia that spoke of victories hard won. More importantly, they moved with a coordination that suggested a level of tactical integration the hegemony had never achieved. Admiral Brennan stood on the bridge of Unbreakable, his weathered face calm despite the odds facing his fleet. Behind him, tactical displays showed the massive enemy formation spread across millions of cubic kilometers of space. By every conventional measure, this should be a massacre of his forces. Signal the fleet, he ordered. All ships, execute. Protocol 7. What happened next violated every principle of space combat doctrine known to the hegemony. The human fleet didn't form a battle line or attempt to match the enemy's defensive formation. Instead, they scattered into dozens of smaller task forces, each moving on seemingly random vectors that made targeting solutions nearly impossible. The coordination required was staggering, hundreds of ships maneuvering in 3-dimensional space, while maintaining mutual support without colliding or creating fratricidal fire zones. Impossible. Supreme Commander Yolthik breathed. No organic minds could coordinate such complexity. He was right. The human ships were linked by quantum-entangled communication rays that allowed instantaneous coordination across any distance. Each vessel's AI worked in concert with others, creating a distributed intelligence that could adapt to battlefield conditions. Faster than any centralized command structure, the first phase of the battle began when Captain Maria Santos, posthumously promoted, and her consciousness uploaded into the fleet's tactical network, identified a critical weakness in the hegemony formation. Her digital ghost whispered across the communication channels, "Gap in Sector 77 Alpha. Recommend concentrated assault." 37 human ships converged on the identified weakness, their weapons coordinating to overwhelm local defenses. Through precise timing rather than raw firepower, the hegemony line buckled, then broke as the destroyer Vengeance punched through their formation and began attacking from within. But the hegemony's response was devastating. The battlecruiser Hammer of Retribution vanished in a ball of superheated plasma as concentrated fire from 6 enemy dreadnoughts overwhelmed her shields. Captain Torres went down with her ship, her final transmission a stream of targeting data that allowed other vessels to avenge her death. The light carrier Defiant lost her entire fighter wing to hegemony interceptors, the small craft falling like burning stars against the black of space. "We're taking massive casualties," Commander Davis reported from the tactical station. 43 ships lost, 71 damaged. Request permission to withdraw and regroup. Brandon's expression never changed. Negative. Signal all ships full offensive. Make them pay for every meter. The battle reached its crescendo when both fleets closed to point-blank range, their weapons tearing at each other in a deadly embrace that turned space itself into a hellscape of energy and destruction. The super dreadnought Galaxy's End dueled with 3 human capital ships simultaneously, her massive bulk-absorbing punishment that would have destroyed lesser vessels. Supreme Commander Yolthik felt his ship shudder as another salvo penetrated. Their armor. Status report. Forward shields down to 30%. Main batteries 4 and 7 offline. Casualty reports from decks 12 through 18. The report ended abruptly as a kinetic penetrator punched through the bridges. Forward armor. Yolthik watched in horror as half his command crew was sucked into space through the rupture, their bodies tumbling away into the void. But the humans were paying an equally terrible price. The dreadnought Righteous Fury listed helplessly as secondary explosions rippled through her hull, her reactor containment failing in a cascade of destruction that painted nearby space in brilliant white light. The heavy cruiser Implacable rammed a hegemony battleship in a desperate attempt to break their line, both vessels disintegrating in an explosion that was visible across the entire battlefield. Admiral Brennan felt each loss like a physical blow. These were his people, dying for a principle that the galaxy had forgotten, that diplomats were sacred, that civilization itself depended on the ability to negotiate rather than simply murder those who disagreed with you, sir. His communications officer's voice was strained. We're receiving a transmission from the Hegemony flagship. They're requesting terms for surrender. Brennan considered for exactly 3 seconds. Tell them the same terms they offered Ambassador Vasquez: unconditional surrender or complete destruction. The battle's final phase began when the human fleet's Reserve Force 50 ships, that had remained hidden in the system's outer asteroid belt, struck the Hegemony formation from behind. The perfectly timed assault caught the enemy command structure. In chaos, their attention focused on the main engagement. Supreme Commander Yolthik died when a human missile penetrated Galaxy's End's command section. The warhead's antimatter payload, reducing the massive ship's forward superstructure to expanding plasma. His final thought was a grudging acknowledgement of human tactical superiority. They had turned his greatest strength into a fatal weakness when the firing finally stopped. The tactical computer struggled to calculate the carnage. 218 human vessels had been destroyed or rendered combatant effective. Nearly 400,000 personnel were dead or missing. But the Hegemony had lost 612 ships and over 2 million personnel. More importantly, they had lost the cream of their military leadership and the psychological advantage that had sustained their empire for a millennium. As Admiral Brennan surveyed the debris field that had once been the largest fleet engagement in galactic history, he felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a shroud. They had won, but the cost had been almost unbearable. Almost, but not quite. Because somewhere in the expanding wreckage of the Hegemony fleet, Ambassador Emilia Vasquez's sacrifice had finally been avenged. The fall of Hegemony Prime began not with orbital bombardment or massive fleet actions, but with a single transmission broadcast across every communication channel in the galaxy. This is Admiral Castor Brennan of the Terran Defense Force, speaking to all civilized species. 3 months ago, the Hegemony murdered Ambassador Emilia Vasquez while she was operating under diplomatic immunity, attempting to negotiate a peaceful resolution to regional conflicts. They chose to respond to our diplomat's outstretched hand with assassination. Today, we deliver our response. The message was accompanied by tactical recordings from Nexus Station, Kepler, Valdris, and Nexus. Major a catalog of Hegemony brutality and human retaliation that had shocked the galaxy into silence. Member species who had cowered before Hegemony expansion for decades watched in amazement as the seemingly unstoppable war machine was systematically dismantled by a species they had considered young and naive. But Supreme Overlord External, ruler of the Hegemony for 6 decades, was not ready to surrender his empire without a final gambit. Activate the World Killer Protocol. He commanded from his throne room deep within the Hegemony capital's planetary fortress. The massive structure had been carved from solid bedrock, its defenses designed to withstand the destruction of entire star systems around him. His most loyal commanders shifted uneasily. The World Killer Protocol had been theoretical, a weapon of last resort that even the Hegemony's warrior culture found distasteful. Overlord General Kextel ventured, the device is untested. The energy requirements alone could destabilize our sun. Then let it burn. Dexnal's voice echoed through the chamber, his bioluminescent patches flaring with homicidal rage. If the Hegemony cannot rule the galaxy, then no one will. The weapon that emerged from the planet's surface defied classification, part stellar engineering project, part artificial singularity generator. It represented centuries of research into forces that should never have been unleashed. Its purpose was simple and terrible: to trigger a cascade reaction that would turn the system's sun into a supernova, destroying everything within 50 light years. Admiral Brennan's fleet detected the energy signatures as they approached the hegemony capital. The readings were so far beyond conventional weapons that his tactical officers initially dismissed them as sensor errors. "Sir," Commander Vega's voice was tight with controlled panic, "if these readings are accurate, they're attempting to weaponize stellar collapse. The explosion would sterilize multiple sectors." Brennan felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. This was what separated humans from species like the hegemony when faced with defeat. They chose mutual destruction rather than accept the consequences of their actions. It was the same impulse that had driven human wars for millennia, the refusal to lose gracefully that had nearly destroyed Earth multiple times. But it was also the quality that had driven humanity to the stars in the first place. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "All ships, maximum acceleration toward the target. We have perhaps 30 minutes before that device reaches critical mass." What followed was less a battle than a race against extinction itself. The human fleet dumped toward Hegemony Prime's surface through a storm of defensive fire that turned space into a lethal maze of energy beams and kinetic projectiles. The planet's orbital fortresses had been designed to repel invasion fleets, not desperate single-target assaults. But their firepower was still devastating. The destroyer Valiant took a direct hit from an orbital defense platform, her hull cracking like an eggshell and venting atmosphere and crew into the void. Captain Rodriguez held his ship together through pure willpower as he guided her on a collision course with the nearest fortress, his sacrifice clearing a path for the ships behind him. 15 minutes to stellar ignition, Commander Vega reported, as explosions bracketed their approach. "Sir, we're not going to make it in time." Brennan studied the tactical display with the calm of a man who had accepted death as the price of duty. The World Killer device was protected by kilometers of solid rock and energy shields that could deflect capital ship weapons. A conventional assault would take hours they didn't have. But humans had never been conventional. "Signal Captain Chen. Aboard Inevitable," he ordered. "Tell her to prepare for Omega Protocol." The Omega Protocol was humanity's own weapon of last resort, a technique developed during the darkest days of Earth's resource wars. It involved overloading the ship's quantum drive to create a controlled singularity, effectively turning the vessel into a miniature black hole. The process was invariably fatal to the crew and theoretically impossible to execute safely. Captain Lisa Chen had volunteered for the mission the moment the implications became clear. Her ship was already damaged, her crew reduced to skeleton numbers by previous engagements. If someone had to die to save billions of lives across the galaxy, she could think of no better end for her vessel. Inevitable to Fleet Command, she broadcast as her ship dove toward the planetary surface. "Beginning final approach. It's been an honor serving with you all." The Inevitable struck Hegemony Prime's surface at 17% of light speed, her mass artificially increased by the controlled gravitational distortion of her overloaded drives. The kinetic energy released was equivalent to a medium-yield stellar event, punching through kilometers of hardened rock and ablative armor in milliseconds. The explosion that followed could be seen from orbit, a mushroom cloud that rose beyond the planet's atmosphere, carrying with it the shattered remains of the World Killer device and the bunker complex that had housed it. Supreme Overlord Dexinal died in the first microsecond of the impact, his body vaporized along with the throne room and the planetary core beneath it. His final thought was a moment of pure incomprehension that a species would sacrifice their own to protect those who had offered them nothing but contempt. As the shockwaves from the impact rippled across Hegemony Prime's surface, Admiral Brennan felt something shift in the galaxy itself. The Hegemony's last gambit had failed. Their capital was in ruins, their military shattered, their leadership dead. But more importantly, their example had become a warning that would echo across the stars for generations to come. 6 months after the Battle of Hegemony Prime, Ambassador Corvic Dralis stood before the newly formed Galactic Council, his forearms spread in the traditional Catherian gesture of profound respect. The chamber that had once hosted the failed Outer Rim Peace Accords now housed representatives from 47 species, all gathered to ratify what historians would call the Vasquez Accords, a comprehensive treaty establishing new protocols for diplomatic community and interspecies conflict resolution. "We gather today," Dralis began, his translated words carrying across the vast chamber. To honor the memory of a human who died believing that peace was possible between our species, Ambassador Amelia Vasquez gave her life to protect not just me, but the principle that diplomacy must be sacred if civilization is to survive. In the human section, Admiral Brennan sat beside the new Terran Ambassador Commander Reese Torres, promoted from her military position to represent Earth's interests. In the new galactic order, the transition from warrior to diplomat had not been easy for her. But she carried Brennan's message clearly. Humanity sought peace, but would never again tolerate those who chose murder over negotiation. The treaty's terms were comprehensive and unambiguous. Diplomatic immunity was absolute. Any violation would trigger immediate economic and military sanctions by all signatory species. A new galactic peacekeeping force would be established, with human military advisors providing training in defensive tactics and rules of engagement. Most importantly, an interstellar court would be created to prosecute war crimes with jurisdiction that transcended species boundaries. The former hegemony territories had been divided among the species they had previously oppressed, with human oversight ensuring that the transition to self-governance proceeded smoothly. It was a victory that tasted of justice, but the cost had been measured in the lives of nearly 500,000 human personnel. Admiral Brennan found himself thinking of those losses as he stood in the memorial garden that had been constructed on the ruins of Hegemony Prime. 47,000 names were etched into the black granite monument, each representing a life given in defense of a principle that most species had forgotten. Captain Santos, Commander Torres, Captain Chet, Captain Rodriguez, heroes who had died so that diplomats like Amelia Vasquez would never again face assassination with impunity. Sir, the voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Sarakim, his new aide. The young officer had been born on one of the Outer Rim colonies, part of the generation that would inherit the galaxy humanity had helped reshape. The ceremony is about to begin. Brennan nodded, straightening his dress uniform as he walked toward the ceremonial platform. Today marked the official end of the Hegemony War, and his role as fleet commander would transition to something far more challenging, helping to build a peace that could last for generations. The crowd that had gathered represented the entire spectrum of galactic civilization. Catherian diplomats stood beside Altarian traders, while Centauri engineers shared technical discussions with human scientists. The diversity was staggering, a testament to what could be achieved when species chose cooperation over conquest. "We are here," Brennan began, his words transmitted across hundreds of worlds, "not to celebrate victory in war, but to remember why we fought." Ambassador Amelia Vasquez believed that different species could find common ground, that our differences could be sources of strength rather than conflict. Her death was meant to end that dream. Instead, it became the foundation for something greater. He paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd, some familiar, others completely alien, all united by a shared commitment to the principles that Amelia had died defending. The hegemony believed that strength meant the ability to impose your will on others. They confused brutality with power, conquest with greatness. They learned, too late, that true strength lies in the choice to show mercy when you could destroy, to offer peace when you have the power to wage war. In the human section, families of the fallen listened with tears streaming down their faces. But there was pride there too, the knowledge that their loved ones had died for something meaningful, something that would outlast the span of any single life. "The galaxy is not a place where the strong devour the weak," Brennan continued. "It is a community where different species can find their place, where diplomats can speak without fear, where the future belongs to those who choose cooperation over domination." The ceremony concluded with the lighting of the eternal flame, a beacon that would burn for 1,000 years, fed by energy donated from every member world. It was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the choice to preserve civilization rather than destroy it remained possible. As the crowds dispersed and the dignitaries returned to their ships, Brennan found himself alone. With Ambassador Dralis, the Catherian had remained silent throughout the ceremony, his compound eyes focused on the memorial wall. "She would have been proud," Dralis said finally, his bioluminescent patches flickering with what Brennan had learned to recognize as deep emotion. Amelia always believed that peace was worth any sacrifice. She never imagined that her death would accomplish more than her life. Brennan nodded, understanding the weight of that truth. Sometimes the most important victories came at prices that seemed too high to bear, but the alternative allowing brutality to triumph over compassion. Conquest to defeat cooperation was unthinkable. The real test comes now, he said quietly. Wars end, but peace has to be built every day. It requires the same commitment, the same sacrifice, the same willingness to stand up for principles, even when it's difficult. Dralus's mandibles clicked. In agreement, the hegemony made the mistake of believing that fear can substitute for respect. They learned otherwise, but the lesson cost them everything. As they stood together in the growing twilight, the species that had found common ground. In tragedy, Brennan felt the weight of the future settling on his shoulders. The galaxy was safer now, but safety was fragile. It required vigilance, commitment, and the willingness to remember that the price of civilization was eternal preparedness to defend it. The war was over. The real work was just beginning. But as he looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky stars, that now represented not conquest, but cooperation. Not dominance, but diversity. Admiral Castor Brennan knew that Amelia Vasquez's death had not been in vain. The galaxy would remember her sacrifice, and the species that had learned to work together in her memory would ensure that no diplomat would ever again face assassination. For the crime of seeking peace, the hegemony had betrayed a human diplomat, believing it would end a problem. Instead, they had created a legend that would inspire the galaxy for generations to come. In the end, that was humanity's greatest weapon, not their ships, or their tactics, or their willingness to sacrifice, but their stubborn refusal to let injustice have the final word. They had turned a moment of betrayal into a foundation for lasting peace, and in doing so, they had proven that some principles were indeed worth dying for. The stars bore witness to that truth, and they would remember.